So I'm going to share with you 5 books that I think you should read this year if you are a chaplain. Hey everybody, welcome to the Tattooed Chap. I'm Drew the Tattooed Chap, and it's good to see you all again. It is a new year, and with a new year, there are goals, resolutions, things like that we like to set for ourselves. So I want to share with you some books that I think every chaplain should read at least once. And so I'm going to share with you 5 books that I think you should read this year if you are a chaplain, and specifically if you are a military chaplain. So I'll have links below for them if you want to look them up on Amazon. So let's look at those books. If you have any book suggestions that you think chaplains should read, maybe you've read a book that you're like, yes, every chaplain should read this, maybe put that in the comments down below, because you know what, as I've said before, we are a learning community and we can learn from one another. And as I'm always looking for new books to read, maybe you have something that I can learn from. So anyways, let's get to the books that I think you should read, and these aren't in any particular order. Book number 1 is The Art of War. As you can see, I have many different pages marked, and one thing I like about The Art of War is it's a really short book. If you don't include endnotes, you're maybe looking at 50 pages. One of the cool things I like about this book is it's written in proverb form, so there's bite-sized pieces of information that you can pull from this and apply. They work great for inspirational quotes that you can maybe pull from, especially if you're in the military community. And it also helps you get inside the mindset of the military people that you serve. If they're an officer, they've probably read this. If they are a senior NCO, they've probably read this book before. And there's just some really cool stuff that you can apply to everyday life. So I can take this and apply it in a military setting where I'm mentoring and discipling soldiers, pull from something that they recognize as authoritative, and I can pull from that and use it. So there's just a lot of cool proverbs in here. So that's the first book that I think you should read. If you're a soldier, if you're in the military, you do a great disservice to yourself if you have not read this book. Book number 2 that I think you should read in 2022 is Grit by Angela Duckworth. I used to have the cover for it. I don't have it anymore, but this is a great book. And in this book, she does a deep dive into what is grit and why it matters, how we can develop grit within ourselves to face the obstacles and overcome them in our lives. What's cool about this book and what Angela Duckworth does in it is that she kind of takes grit from a scientific, a psychological approach and kind of just does a deep dive in it and really helps you understand where it comes from and how to develop it. And it's good because you can apply it to yourself, you can apply it to your family, but you can also apply it to the soldiers that you're serving. So number 2 was Grit by Angela Duckworth. Third book that I think you should read, and this is a book that I read in 2021 that I had on my shelf for years, but I never actually got to it, is a book by C.S. Lewis called A Grief Observed. And it's a short book. I mean, like 55 pages? So you could probably blast through this in 2 days. It is a great book, and it kind of just talks about, it's C.S. Lewis tackling the idea of grief after he lost his wife. So he's really kind of using his mind and his intellect, which is amazing, and he's just really kind of tackling what grief looks like as he's processing grief. And so it puts a real face on grief. This right here can help you get into the mind of maybe what people are thinking or going through when they've lost someone. And it also shows us that a giant in the faith, an intellectual giant, can go through very dark seasons and how they perhaps even process it. And if that happens to them, how many other people are going through similar situations when they lose someone? I'm a very intellectual person. I don't have a lot of emotive type things, but I remember reading through this and even crying a few times because I think it's so powerful, and it's short. And I think A Grief Observed would be a great one. So the fourth book I think you should read as a chaplain, if you haven't read it yet, is a book called Killing from the Inside Out by a guy named Robert Meagher. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. Anyways, it's a really good book that talks about moral injury and how it relates to just war theory. Just because we may feel we're justified in going to war or using violence, it doesn't mean that we won't be morally injured in the process. And ask some questions that maybe as chaplains we haven't really wrestled with before, like where do we stand on just war theory? Is just war theory something that we should go to if a soldier is saying, yeah, I went through this tough situation where I had to take a life or I saw a life taken, and do we pat him on the back and say, well, you did your job and it was a justified kill? Is that going to be what brings healing to the woundedness that maybe is going on in their heart, or is there another way? And I think Meagher in this book does a great job in asking those questions and making us wrestle with that in our theology and maybe how we pastorally approach moral injury and just war theories. Now, the last book that I want to recommend is a book that I'm finishing up right now, and it's one I've had for, I think, 2 years on my bookshelf, and I just haven't got to it because it's a thick book. But it's called The Body Keeps the Score, and it talks about the brain, the mind, and the body in the healing process after it faces trauma. He's spent his lifetime dealing with people who have gone through trauma, and just kind of really looks at the science of trauma and pulls in lots of different research data and talks about how trauma in childhood affects people in adulthood. It talks about how it affects relationships, and there's just so much stuff in here that it is just mind-boggling, and how much perspective it gives. And he talks about how to bring about healing in traumatic situations. So if you are a chaplain, if you are a minister, I think this is a great book to read, because most of the time the people that come to our doors to talk to us about tough stuff, they're coming to us because they've faced some kind of trauma in their life. That is book number 5, The Body Keeps the Score. Great book. Most of these I think you could find on Audible as well. I think A Grief Observed is free. The only one I'd recommend not listening to on Audible would be The Art of War. I think there's something that's nice about it in reading it. So in 2022, those are the 5 books that I think you should read as a chaplain. If you have not read them yet, I think it'll enrich your perspective and your ministry as we help those that are going through difficult seasons. Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to comment below if you think there's some other book that you think we should check out. And also give a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And we will see you next time, and goodbye.
No.